Hello everybody, Prepper Steve here. Today's video is preparedness step 1. And the very first thing you're going to have to do if you're going to start preparing is you're going to have to make a choice. And the first choice that you really need to make is, are you going to knuckle down and grind it out where you're at? Or are you going to get the heck out of there and go to some place with a higher level of safety and security? So that's the very first choice you're going to have to make. And personally, if I were in a city, I would definitely plan on bugging out of there, getting somewhere with a higher level of safety and security. Because in a disaster scenario, in a disruption, someplace that's highly populated tends to have lots of chaos. Now, if the military is able to step in and gain control, that helps, but in situations where they're not doing that, things get really wild really fast. And I'll talk more about that on some other videos, but that's what you need to decide is, are you going to stay where you're at, or are you going to get the heck out of there? If you're in a suburban area, and you have a good community, you're in good with all your neighbors, you have good upstanding neighbors, and they have similar mindsets to yourself, that's a situation where you might be able to ride it out there. If that's not the case, then I would consider bugging out of there as well. Now, if you're in a rural area, that would be a better place to try and ride things out. And that's what you need to ask yourself. If you're leaning towards staying where you are, knuckling down and trying to ride out the storm, you need to know, are you able to provide food from where you're at? Can you grow a garden? Can you raise some animals? If things go long term, do you have water, or do you have the ability to get water, make water, pull water out of a well, whatever? So do you have food and water where you're at? Another thing to consider is, how visible are you where you're at? If things are going bad and the stuff is hitting the fan, are you going to be able to be hidden where you're at? Because what you don't want is a roving band of drug-seeking wackos being able to see you and see very clearly that you have stuff, and they're going to want to come get that stuff. So you need to ask yourself that question: are you too visible where you're at? And another question you need to ask yourself is, can you effectively defend your property with the people that are going to be there? By effectively defend, that's a whole nother situation. That's a whole nother video on its own, being able to effectively defend your position. But that's something you need to ask yourself is, can you do these things? Can you provide food and water from where you're at? Are you too visible where you're at? Can you effectively defend where you're at? If you're comfortable with all of those things, then yes, you may want to ride it out where you're at. And your level of security and self-reliance can be increased exponentially by doing that, by staying where you're at, if you're in the right situation. If you're not in the right situation, and if you think about those things and decide that, yeah, I need to get the heck out of here if something happens, I need to get myself and my family someplace safer, then you need to decide now where that place is going to be. And I wouldn't pick just one place, because you never know what's going to happen. And if there's something going on that's bad enough to force you out of your home now, what's going to be the situation at the area where you're planning to go? Is it going to be the same situation there? You need to think about these things. You need to come up with 2 or 3 alternate places where you can go if the stuff hits the fan, if you decide you're going to bug out. And when you decide where those places are, where you want to go, like if it's a family member's home or a friend's home or something like that, you need to sit down and have a conversation with those people. And I'll do a video on how to do that effectively, but that's something you need to do. You need to sit down and have a conversation with someone if they're your backup plan. Because what you don't want is, you don't want to just show up in a situation like this where you've had to bug out, you've had to go somewhere else, and you show up on somebody's doorstep and they're not prepared to receive you. That's not going to go very well. And I've seen this kind of thing happen, and it's happened recently, not necessarily here in America, but in other places. And talk to some veterans that have been over in Afghanistan and Iraq during all that mess, and you'll see a little bit about what I'm talking about. But yeah, you don't just want to show up and expect them to welcome you with open arms, because that's probably not going to be the case unless you've talked about this beforehand and made some kind of plan. And again, I'll do another video on how to effectively have that conversation to where you don't look like a wacko. I know a lot of people are afraid. That's one of the things people think about when they start considering preparedness and becoming a prepper, is, are they going to be labeled some kind of wacko by their friends and family? And that tends to get people to not have the conversations they should be having. And so I'll do a video over how to effectively do that in the future. But when you've made your choice whether or not you're going to bug out, and you've come up with your bug out locations, like I say, I'd come up with 2 or 3 alternatives just in case. You never know what's going to happen, but just plan for the worst, and in that case you'll be okay. So once you've made that decision, that's step 1, making those decisions. The choice: am I going to bug out? Am I going to stay? And if I'm going to bug out, where am I going to go? Once you've made those decisions, you can start planning effectively. And by planning effectively, we'll go back to the concentric circles that I talked about. The very first thing you want to do is get yourself set up to where you can survive for 3 days, no matter what happens. So, if you're going to bug out, and you're going to bug out immediately, then those supplies need to be highly mobile, and you need to really, really think hard about what your bug out is going to consist of, because everything that you save up in as a preparedness item is something you're going to have to transport. So you need to really consider that if you're going to be bugging out. So if you're going to stay where you're at, it's a little easier to prepare those items. And what you need to consider is not only food and water, but that's important. I mean, if you don't have food and water, you're done. You're not going to go 3 days without food and water and be in your right mind. So you need to have 3 days of food and water set up. Also, you need to think about medical supplies. And by medical supplies, that's a wide range. And I'll do another video on medical supplies, but there are some people out there, and I'll try to put some links up with some folks that are out there that are a lot more knowledgeable about that than I am. But I can give you some basic information that's very useful. But when you think about your medical supplies, you need to be understanding is you're thinking about medical supplies that you may need in a situation where things have gotten bad enough that you're thinking about leaving your home and going somewhere else because it's safer. So think about what medical supplies you're going to be needing there. And also entertainment. I see a lot of people talking about being prepared, preparedness, and sustainability and all this, but nobody really talks about things like entertainment. And I have been in situations, I was in an ice storm that we were 7 days without any electricity, and it was during an ice storm, so there were a lot of things affected. But because of my level of preparedness, we were able to ride it out without any problem. But when you think about hunkering down for 7 days, sure, we had food, we had water, we had the warmth, we had everything that we needed to survive, but things could get really boring really fast, especially when you have children. So you need to think about entertainment as well. That's, it's a small thing, but for your overall general mental condition, that's an important aspect. You need to have some form of entertainment. So these are things you need to think about when you're thinking about that 3 days of survival, that first level of preparedness, getting yourself set up for 3 days. Once you've done that, you made your decision where you're going to go, what you're going to do. You've got your 3 days set up. You can survive 3 days no matter what happens. All the lights go out, everything's closed, you can't go to a store, whatever happens, you're good to go for 3 days. Then you can go to level 2. You can start thinking about level 2 of preparedness, and I'll do another video on what that would entail. But I hope you guys are enjoying this. I hope there's something in here that's maybe helping you guys. Please post comments, questions, anything you got. I'll try to answer those as best I can. But I sure appreciate you guys watching. This is Prepper Steve, and I appreciate it. Thank you.